Okay. See if when I sit at the desk, if you have me in the shot. If not, it's gotta get moved over to this way just a little bit.
Look, you're in the shot.
Huh?
You're in the shot.
Okay, good. Do you have people in the room yet?
No.
Good.
We have people in.
Okay. How many?
3.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Hopefully me too. What are we up to in the class?
What?
How many people are in the class?
7.
Okay. Okay, that's what I wanted, but it's got a lag again. Alright, still at 7.
Drop down to 5.
Drop down to 5?
Yes.
Maybe they lost their feed. Okay. I'm gonna give it another minute for people to log on and be part of the stream before I take attendance, but hey everybody, I hope you're doing well and good to have you here. So we'll get started in a minute. What are we up to? Anything new?
6.
Okay. Well, there are 6 people present on the stream. Anybody that comes in later on, I'll just adjust attendance, but I'm gonna take it right now. So if you are present, and you kind of have to be hearing this, post your name and say hello.
Emma.
Hi, Emma.
Evan.
Evan
Petruski.
Petruski. Okay, hey Evan.
Tyron. Or Tyron.
Tyrene.
Yeah.
Hi. Hey, Ty.
John Retton,
Hi, John.
Samaj,
Samaje. How's it going?
Zach,
Hey, Zach.
Alex,
Hello, Alex.
and Matt.
And Matt. Okay. We're going to go ahead and save attendance this way for now, and I will go ahead and adjust it later on for those who don't show up. And John will remind me, won't you, John?
Yep.
Sure you will, huh? I have to remind John to remind me, so, but it just gets like that, I guess. You know, we're in quarantine time, so everything is moving much slower, and we're, it's a little bit like a Salvador Dali painting. You might want to look up Salvador Dali, find out what I mean by that. All right, this week we're covering a unit that's a lot of fun. It's really the beginnings of rock and roll, the early days of rock and roll, coming out of this early 1950s era of lots of different music styles that are popular, and everything from R&B styles like boogie woogie and the blues, and all the way to country music and even Tin Pan Alley sounds. They're all setting up for this change in music that's coming out called rock and roll, and it's a really exciting time in music history. It's a really exciting time in American culture too, for a lot of different reasons. The early 1950s is a time of nostalgia that people like to hearken back to pretty often. All of the 1950s, it was a time of economic prosperity and a lot of other things that people miss in a nostalgic way. There were things that were wrong at that time too, and maybe we don't miss those things too much, but definitely do miss a little more simplistic lifestyle when people were more optimistic and hopeful, and it seemed like we had the world by the tail, and that was America at that time. So I want to talk about some stuff that's going on Moodle so that you know, and then I want to go ahead and launch into our lecture. But before I do, I want to also check in a little bit about the coronavirus and what's going on in our lives right now. So, I know this is a time when a lot of you are feeling frustrated that you're not getting to do a lot of the things you'd planned to do right now. Everything from, you know, take classes in person and play in your individual team sports and that you're all involved in, or, you know, the radio station was all excited about the music festival that we're getting ready to put on. So yeah, we've had a bunch of things we've had disappointments with, but at the same time, you guys, if you're healthy right now and you don't have anyone in your life that you're worried about, you're doing pretty good, and you do have the opportunity at least to salvage this spring with a positive note. No matter where you are, you can finish up this course, you can have some fun, you can learn a little bit about American popular culture and pop music and the power that popular music has on culture and society. And that's why this course is developed, because it's, you know, popular music as a vehicle for mass communication, for mass messages. And right now that's happening in real time during the coronavirus. Hey, I just have a quick check to make. Can you see my slippers in this video?
No.
Oh, good. You know, the fun thing about working from home is you get to work in your slippers. But, you know, I'm on video, so don't necessarily know if y'all want to see my slippers. Should I show you my slippers? Just to get it out of the way, it's the elephant in the room. There's my slipper. I don't have to put shoes on right now. Sorry. But anyway, I digress. So, popular music is playing a really important role right now in uplifting people, bringing people together, putting messages out about, you know, proper hand washing and social distancing. Some of them are funny. They're like novelty songs or parodies of other songs. I'm talking about either what we're going through emotionally or, things that we're being told about social distancing. But music has enormous power to change people's moods, uplift them, help them to think more deeply about things or connect, not feel alone. Music has a lot of power. And right now, popular music is being utilized, and popular culture in general. We've got TV stars and film stars, musicians, all on YouTube or other platforms, putting on little concerts from their home, or comedians doing some stand-up video and posting it to uplift people. You've got late night talk show hosts who are doing shows pared down, scaled down from their garages at home. So everybody's doing their part to kind of uplift everybody. But one of the biggest vehicles for message sending and upliftment is popular music. And right now, the musician Bon Jovi, John Bon Jovi, popular from the 1980s forward, also as a movie actor and a writer. Anyway, he has this restaurant that he opened in 2008, and it's like for people at risk of hunger. It's for people at food risk. And you don't have to have money, but when you come there and you order something, if you can't pay for it, you have to do something to work it off. Maybe it's sweep the floors, maybe it's check the bathrooms for toilet paper and soap, and do some of the tasks around the restaurant to kind of work off what you ate. And it's a really successful philanthropy. A few years ago, he retired from it because he said that he was taking the place of somebody who could be a volunteer and work for their food. So, he kind of oversees it, but he's not in it every day. Well, he's back because right now they can't staff their kitchen with volunteers because of COVID-19 health regulations and such. Only paid employees could be there. So he's there washing dishes and doing his thing. And he was on a talk show I saw this morning. And he said, his wife took a picture of him doing the dishes. And when he saw the picture, he thought to himself, well, if you can't do what you do, you can at least do something. And so, that it kind of struck me. If you can't do what you do what you can do. So that was the quote. And I thought that was really kind of profound. If you can't do what you would normally do at this time, do the things that you can do. And if that's uplifting somebody by calling them, FaceTiming your grandparents, or checking in on neighbors, anything that you could do right now is important to help other people and lift their spirits up. There are some people who are sick at home alone, they're quarantined, they reach out to people in a socially distant, appropriate way, though. But anyway, the power of popular music. So John Bon Jovi is writing this song that's titled "If You Can't Do What You Do, Do What You Can," and he's asking America to contact him, I think it's via Twitter, and add some of the final lyrics, some of the final choruses to the song, kind of taking the American experience from this. So what a great vehicle for popular music right now to help in a situation or to send a message of hopefulness and, we're all in this together and we're going to be okay. And that is the power of pop music, and it has been since the minstrel shows back in the 1800s, when they were spreading messages that weren't very healthy for us about racism and things, but were what the status quo, the messages that they wanted to get out and sort of, move society in that general direction. And music was a really popular vehicle. It's, helped to change minds and hearts about a lot of things. And you see that happening right now in popular music and in the times that we're in. Really quick, my son Jake is finally turned the corner. He does have the virus and he has pneumonia, but today is the first day in 12 days he hasn't had a fever, so yeah, happy about that. And his wife is coming down with it. Right now it seems mild and we hope it stays that way. My sister Christine lives in a group home out on eastern Long Island, and she's got cerebral palsy and she's medically fragile along with the rest of the people that live in her group home. They're all in the same condition, really. And one of them is tested positive for the virus. So when you think about how those things fly through facilities like that, these viruses go through, nursing homes and care facilities and group homes, places where a large number of people are together a lot. Yeah. Hospitals is a terrible place to be during an epidemic. It's not good. You don't want to be in the emergency room of anywhere in New York City right now. You're gonna get it. You're just gonna get it. And so also my aunt is fighting bone cancer right now, and she also has gotten the virus. So that's not good. That's not good. This is really happening, and so I hope you're respecting and adhering to the whole thing about social distancing and washing your hands and being mindful of, what you touch and who you touch after that. And it's all important right now. This isn't a joke. It's not just some other kind of an illness. It's a really deadly one, and people I love are sick with it, and I hope nobody you love is sick with it, and that everybody in your world's okay. All right, so now on to stuff. I have office hours this week. It's Friday during what would be our class time from 10 to 11 on Moodle. On this week's block, you'll see chat, office hours. Click on that link and you can talk to me in real time if you have questions that you maybe don't want to take up class time for right now, or just occurs to you later on. You don't feel like sending an email. Come see me Friday from 10 to 11 on Moodle. I will be there. So, speaking of which, let's check Moodle and see what kind of assignments we have coming up this week. As soon as I find my cursor, which is only the size of, my foot. Like, how come I can't see it? Well, because I have a guide dog. Yeah, that's right. All right, so for this week block, which is titled April 1st to the 7th, and obviously this is March 31st, but you already know that Moodle's dates are set up from midweek to midweek, so it's weird. But for the late 1950s, some music that I have is Bill Haley and his Comets, and this is a live performance from Europe in 1958. It really gives you a good idea of Bill Haley. He was one of the first rock stars in around 1954 is when he broke out, and interesting guy. We're going to talk about him. Billboard's top rock hits from 1955 to 1959. This is a compilation, a montage of all of the hit songs from 1955 to 1959. It'll take you about 7 minutes to listen to, but you'll get a really good idea of what that sound was like back then. And again, it's varied. There's some Tin Pan Alley kind of ballady stuff. There's doo-wop, which is vocal harmony type of groups. There's rock and roll with the lead guitar, with the guitar being the lead instrument in the band, like Chuck Berry, but there's also rock and roll where the saxophone and the piano are the lead instruments. So there's a lot of variation of things going on. There's R&B that rock and roll is taking off from. So I want you to listen to that track there, the 1955 to 59, so you have a better, well-rounded idea of what the sound of that era, this period, was. You also have a short essay, and it's about the electric guitar in rock and roll. And it played a really important part in the development of rock and roll, and symbolism for rock and roll, and youth culture, and reckless abandon, and modernization, and power, and some people saw it as a phallic symbol, the way that the guitar is held when it's played, and the way that, it's mostly a male instrument, at least it was for a very long time. So the electric guitar starts to come into prominence right now, and it has an effect on culture and on the genre. So I have an article attached to this, and I want you to click on the article and read it, and then answer the questions here for your forum. Right? Is that? No, it's your short essay. Sorry. Electric guitar. So it's a short essay. When does it due? Oh no, I think it's due on Saturday though. So you don't have to worry about it right this minute. Here's your forum. Okay, long live rock and roll. So what do you feel about the popular music style called rock and roll? How do you feel about it? Some people, it's not their thing, right? Rap is not rock and roll. Rap is very different. Uh, do you listen to today's version of rock music, or does your taste go to somewhere else? Most of us appreciate some form of rock and roll. So, what's your favorite style? Is it more R&B and funk like Prince or Lenny Kravitz, or think about Parliament, Funkadelic, those kinds of musicians that are like very R&B rock? Parliament is guitar craze, right? Average White Band, all these other groups that are R&B but also rock. And so, what's your favorite style? Uh, is it country rock like Rascal Flatts or the Dixie Chicks or Leonard Skinner, or do you prefer hard driving simplicity of punk or thrash? Maybe you like alt, indie rock, or something else. If you do, let me know. Post which is your favorite and why. What about it appeals to you? Finally, because there's a last part to this forum posting that you need to think about, pick an artist that appeals to you from the early days of rock and roll, too, that we'll be talking about. From 1955 to 1959, this might require you to do a little bit of searching around on YouTube or whatever for rock and roll 1955 to 1959 and listening to some different artists. So, who do you prefer? Who do you like? Anyway, your first post, your discussion post itself for this forum needs to be, about 150 words or less, 125 to 150. I want it to be a good response. There's two parts to it. Remember, there's what kind of rock music appeals to you right now, even if it's not something you listen to all the time. Which branch of rock and roll or rock music do you like? And the other part of the question is, from the early days of rock and roll, who appeals to you out of that? Is it Elvis? Is it Buddy Holly? Is it Bill Haley, who we're going to listen to? Maybe it's Pat Boone. That could be. So whoever it is, you talk about that, and then there's the discussion post to 60, and your replies are worth 40, total of 100. Easy grade, people. Get it done. It's fun, too, When we were talking about swing music and stuff like that, and I was looking back at your posts about your thoughts on that, you had a lot of really interesting, good things to say, so let's keep that up. This link here just talks about the forum participation grade. That's where I'm going to input that grade, so you don't have to do anything to that. Here is a video I'd like you to watch called The Day the Music Died, and it says, in the winter of 1959, while traveling on a rock and roll concert tour, 3 of the day's most popular and influential young rock and roll musicians died in a small plane crash in a farm field in Iowa. And Buddy Holly from Buddy Holly and the Crickets, a Texas guitar player, started out playing country music, ended up playing what's now called rockabilly, but really distinct kind of Texas country rock and roll style, very influential in today's rock and roll. The Big Bopper, J.P. Richardson was his name. He was an entertainer, and Richie Valens, who wrote the song La Bamba, you probably have heard that. He was only 17 years old when he died in the airplane crash. So that's a video about it, and there's questions attached to it. So it says, the question even arose about whether or not rock and roll as a genre was going to continue forward, because it really shook young people up a lot. They sort of, for the first time, were questioning their own mortality, and this was an age where young people were exercising their youth, right, and their vitality, and they saw themselves as semi-immortal, and bad things didn't really happen to them, and young people are guilty of doing that throughout time. You don't see the big picture sometimes, and don't have enough experience to know that bad things happen to everybody. So, but anyway, The Day the Music Died, that's an important video for you guys to watch, and I want you to do that too. And so that's it. I want to talk about missed work a little bit as well. So if you're behind in the forum from last week or you have not turned in your think response from last week, I have so far graded everybody's forum responses and their their little think response quiz that you guys did, right? That's this right here. Short essay response, that's what it was. And it goes in your quiz categories, so it really counts for more than just, it's not pass, fail, or something. You get actual points for it. So the rubric for it is still there. If you haven't done this yet, it's still open. You can do it, but I am going to be taking points off for late submission. However, it's better than failing this, because failing this is failing a quiz, and that's not a good thing to have on your record for your grades. Also, if you missed the forum from last week, you can still post in there. Let me know if you did so I can catch your grade up to reflect the work that you've done. So, thus far, does anybody have any questions about last week's assignments or this week's assignments, or how my cats are, or how Reggie is, or any questions out there from anybody? Okay. Well, again, hope everybody is doing good, and now that we're kind of caught up, I want to get started on the late 1950s, the mid to late 1950s. Like I said earlier, if you were not here, this is a time that Americans nowadays like to look back on it with great fondness and nostalgia. Things just seem to be kind of clicking and humming along for the United States of America. We're done with World War II. By this point, at the end of the 1950s, even the Korean conflict is going to be behind us. And, so it's a time of optimism, and it's a time of high energy, and people have a lot of hope, especially the hope of America and the hope in science and technology and discovery. This is an interesting time. Lots of entertainment, especially in the movies, is around science and sci-fi. While westerns are really big topics and themes, sci-fi is also really going to the moon, space monsters, other kinds of crazy things like Godzilla came out of this time, and those sorts of monsters. But everybody during the mid to late 1950s values like a modern aesthetic. If you go to places like theme parks, or amusement parks is what they referred to them then, everything was very space age looking and futuristic and modern. And space age futuristic and modern was like the design aesthetic in people's homes, their dress, just really things started to become a little more streamlined and less poofy in fashion. Just a more, like I said, today contemporary, progressive, modern aesthetic. These are the values that are important to people in the mid to late 1950s. This is the era that I was born into. And so, this really is my mom's generation. This is her time when she was a teenager and a young adult. And those things, were important to the culture, to the United States. We were having space races. Who could put a man in orbit around the Earth, who could send some unmanned something to the moon, and thinking about getting to the moon. And in a race with Russia, who we're in a Cold War with at the same time. So people are looking toward the future, and technology is booming, and the economy is really booming. Like I said, it's a time of high energy and optimism. Everybody's feeling hopeful. In families, only one parent has to work at this time, and it's affordable. People are able to make ends meet. It depends on what your job is and how much training and education you have and what you make for a living, but most people are able to live off of one person's income. Again, economic boom. This is when baby boomers or young children are being born right about now. It's also a car culture. The 1950s, the car just starts to boom, not just as a mode of transportation, but as a statement about your life. It's like a lifestyle statement and a statement of prosperity. It's a symbol of prosperity and power and strength. Lots of things surrounded the car culture back in the 1950s and still to this day. Cars are seen as more than just something to get you from point A to point B. Well, this really starts to happen during the 1950s, and this part of the 1950s in particular, you have the car culture and drive-in everything. Everything is drive-in. Drive-in dry cleaners, drive-in movie theaters were huge back then. It was a great place to bring a date or a car full of friends or your family. It was affordable. You paid by the carload. You go in, you get your popcorn and your drink from the concession stand that's at the edge of this big parking lot that all has these posts with a speaker on it. And when you turn your radio dial to a certain frequency, you'd be able to pick up the broadcast. That's the way some of them worked, off of low power FM. The way that others of them worked was that they were hardwired speakers that came out of the, they were like transistor speakers, and the signal came out of the snack concession house, had like the movie projector in it and the speaker system, the broadcasting system. So that was a fun thing that people did during those days. Drive-in restaurants were very big, and a place where teenagers in suburbia often were found hanging out, showing their cars off. Another thing that suburban teenagers love to do from the East Coast to the West Coast is as soon as they got their license in their first car, they went cruising on the weekend evenings. And it was really about driving around town and being nowhere but just being seen and seeing your friends. And people would work on their cars, guys especially would work on their cars and soup them up and trick them out, and they impressed each other that way. This is a period of time too that's starting to move into the beach culture and surfer music. And I mean like the Beach Boys, not Avril Lavigne. It's like skater boy music. But yeah, so you've got a lot of life revolving around the car itself. Again, a symbol of prosperity, power, control. It's a rite of passage for young people, so young people are very glued into it. They're very keyed into it. And youth culture is huge right now. Youth culture is dominant to the point where it's annoying adults, right? That young people's preferences and wants and needs are taking sometimes precedence over the traditional way that things are done in society. And there are a lot of people who do not like this rock and roll stuff. And they don't like it because it involves race mixing, and they fear that white American culture is going to be taken over and overrun by black American culture, and that their young people are all going to become corrupt by being friends with black people and liking black music. And there's a big culture war going on at this time. Young people were drawn to this type of hard driving, heavy beat, good swing to it, very danceable, singable, fun, lively, energetic, and oftentimes hopeful music that they were listening to. Their parents hated it, and the people who hated rock and roll hated it because they didn't want change. They thought that young people should value the things that they themselves had grown up with more so than this newfangled stuff. And they also didn't like the what they thought was overt sexuality in a lot of the musical performances, especially by people like Elvis Presley, who gyrated their hips when they sang, and oh my god, that was just way over the top. When he appeared on Ed Sullivan, they only showed him from the waist up because it was banned to show his hips moving. Imagine what they would have said if they saw Axl Rose. They would have flipped out. If you don't know who Rose is, welcome to the jungle. You'll figure it out. Anyways, so youth culture, there's a generation gap forming between young people and older people who just don't get it, right? And the older people who think that the youth are out of control, and there are all kinds of movies going that are out that star people like James Dean and Marlon Brando and Natalie Wood, about youth gone to hell in a handbasket, teenagers in trouble, problem out of control, overly indulged youth that are rebelling against society for no good reason, like James Dean's most favorite movie, Rebel Without a Cause. Like, it was labeled that because really the perception was that young people were complaining about nothing. They had nothing to complain about. They didn't live through the Great Depression. They didn't live through World War II. They have all this stuff being handed to them. What are they so unhappy about? And young people have definite gripes. Don't see it that way at all. So a generation gap is starting to form. Also, families are even more, it started in the early 1950s, but toward the late 1950s, there's a huge exodus from the cities. It's sometimes called white flight, where people from neighborhoods like in New York City, like Brooklyn and Queens, were starting to, because of the GI Bill and the men who served overseas, either in Korea or in Vietnam, being able to afford to buy a house, and all of the building and developing that was going on out on Long Island and in other parts of suburbia around the country, families now are leaving their apartments in the city for places that are pre-planned and prefabbed, where most of the houses look like each other, and each neighborhood has its own like strip mall, shopping center, and each neighborhood has its own like community gathering space, for instance, like a playground and a picnic area, or a community pool, or both. Recreation areas that are just for that specific neighborhood are being developed in these suburban developments by builders like the Levitts, that are putting up these prefabbed houses all over the place, and very neatly well organized. And you go into these neighborhoods back in the late 1950s, early 1960s, as they're being developed, and there's not a tree in sight because everything had just been mowed down and paved over and sidewalked over and lawns planted, and the trees hadn't had time to grow yet. So it's kind of a spooky, weird thing. But anyways, so people are moving out to the suburbs, and that's changing culture too, where people were walking a lot more to go to the movies or to go out to eat in the neighborhood, sitting on their front steps in a city neighborhood and socializing with each other, watching their kids play from out their apartment window or the front steps of their apartment building. All of that sort of stuff is different when you're in a suburban neighborhood. Even if it has a cul-de-sac, people are a little more separated. So, that's what's going on with families in suburbia. Still, dad is head of the household. Mom is generally home taking care of things unless something catastrophic happened, like dad died, or divorce is still not prevalent in this country. Most families, the average is 2 to 3 children, and everybody is busy trying to be good middle-class Americans, right? That's a goal. They just want to live up to the American middle class dream, move out of working so hard, and have their own little plot of backyard where they can have barbecues and family over, and a better lifestyle for their kids, better schools, less crowded, all those things. And so the big economic boom that's going on right there is allowing families to move into places like Long Island and Connecticut and other suburban areas around big metropolitan areas, like around Pittsburgh and other places. People are moving out away from the city center. Segregation is still an evil demon. More than just racism, it's barring blacks and whites from being able to do certain things together. It's still very much an ugly demon and a black mark on our culture at this time. It's also the reason for something that happened in popular music in the radio field called payola. Payola was the DJ that coined the phrase rock and roll is Alan Freed. He was also a musician. He had a band called the Moondogs, and he had a really popular radio show every night on. He was first in the Cleveland area, then he was in the New York City area. And one of the things that he promoted, aside from playing a lot of African American music, rhythm and blues, he coined the phrase rock and roll. He also hosted these big dance parties. And remember, I told you guys that when in the 1950s, when these teen dance halls and clubs were around, you could, or even adults, right? If you wanted to dance, if you were white, you came one night. If you were black, you came another night. Well, Alan Freed had biracial, co-racial events, and he played a lot of what they called Negro music back then. And the people that hated rock and roll to begin with hated him, and the people that really hated desegregation and wanted everybody to stay in their place and keep the status quo with white supremacy and white majority leading the way in our culture, they did not like Alan Freed. So there was a practice that went on in radio for as long as they had started playing recorded music. Sound recording companies, record companies would come to them and give them kind of bribes, under the table money, or gifts, trips, jewelry, cars, vacations, right? All this great stuff they'd get. They weren't well paid at the time to begin with, so it wasn't a far-fetched thing to think that they would take the money that was offered to them, and it wasn't against the law in most places, but in New York City there was a not often used law of business practice called payola, and that is a law that was used against Alan Freed and other young DJs that were playing rock and roll on the radio. Were brought before Congress for a committee for hearings about payola, and the fear was, did American DJs have so much power, and did the American media have so much power that they were helping to change culture and society, and that they were able to corrupt youth? A lot of these people felt like rock and roll music was corrupting our youth, and so they were going to ferret out the ones who were taking bribes and money. And so all sorts of radio personalities were brought before this congressional hearing. Wolfman Jack and Dick Clark and a friend of mine, Cousin Brucey, who's still on the radio. He's on Sirius XM. And Alan Freed, all brought in front of this committee in Washington, D.C. And only Alan Freed was ever charged with anything. And some of the DJs, like Dick Clark, admitted to taking even more gifts and things like that than Alan Freed even did. So he ended up losing his career, and no one would hire him after that, and he died 2 years later, a young man. And to this day, the term rock and roll is because he made it famous, and he is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and in the Radio Broadcasting Hall of Fame, but too little too late for him. So that's the story of segregation and payola. It wasn't so much about unethical business practices as it was to try to prevent, or at least put up obstacles to these media personalities who had a lot of pull and influence over young people, and the establishment, the government, political leaders, church leaders all felt like this type of culture and this kind of music was low morality, and that it was corrupting the youth, and it was gonna send the United States to hell in a handbasket. And they were doing everything that they could to fight it. So this again is the start. Like, this gets worse in the 1960s. The generation gap becomes worse. young people's demand for change in our culture and society, equity and fairness in work, and with gender roles, male and female, among races, caring for the environment and the planet. All these things started to become even more amped up and important in the 1960s. But anyway, so the toothpaste is out of the tube at this point. There's no way to stop the youth culture freight train that's steaming down the tracks of the United States of America, and it's going to affect not only everything about our culture at that time, but European and other cultures too are all affected by this rise of youth culture and the culture of rock and roll and pop music at this time. So that's happening there. Said about space and science and sci-fi is a big thing. And I talked about James Dean and Marlon Brando and how all these like movies and TV shows that feature like youth in trouble. They're just out making trouble for no good reason. You know, dissatisfied, disgruntled youth that don't really have a gripe, but just think they have permission to be spoiled and do whatever they want. And so that's kind of the pushback from the establishment. At the same time, though, it backfires because actors like Brando and Jimmy Dean are idolized by young people, and they want to be just like them. They're wearing the leather jackets like these guys and being the tough guy greasers that Brando and Dean sort of portray in the movies. Kind of has the opposite effect. It doesn't turn anybody off to like the woeful ways of wayward teenage-dom. Or something close to that. So, that's the culture at this time. It is, it's still innocent, it's still very optimistic, but there's trouble in paradise. You can feel a rumbling underneath the surface of American culture, and things are shifting and changing, and the older generation doesn't like this newfangled crazy stuff, and young people are like, we want no part of your futsy-dutsy fartsy old ways of doing things. They're already proven to be inefficient and just didn't get us anywhere. So now young people are saying we're doing it our way. So that's the mindset of society right there. I want to take a quick look at the other set of notes that I have and get at least started and underway with the chapter itself and talking about what's important during this time. So, this is chapter 8, and the chapter is entitled Rock and Roll. Oh, Rock Around the Clock. That's a Bill Haley and the Comets song. And rock and roll 1954 to 1959. The advent of rock and roll during the mid-1950s brought about enormous changes in American popular music. So we just talked a lot about that, like style, previously considered, what was considered pop was way too mainstream anymore, and the Tin Pan Alley sound and the crooners, all of that is not in style anymore. It's not what is trending. What's trending is a more modern, hard-driving, youthful, upbeat sound. So in some of this they talk about that there's a mythology around the emergence of rock and roll, and some things are not true. Like rock and roll was not a new style of music. Instead, it was a compilation of a lot of different types of music together that formed a different type of music. Sometimes it was country music just with a stronger beat, but it wasn't new. The era of rock and roll was not the first time that music was written specifically to appeal to young people. No, it was not the first time that music was written to specifically appeal to young people. Think about the 1920s and the flappers and the Charleston and ragtime. Older people in that time during in our culture did not approve or like that crazy music. Same thing could be said for the jitterbug and some swing music from the 1940s. So, old people are always complaining about young people's stuff. Have you noticed that? I have, and I've been a young person, and now I'm an old person, and I get it. So, rock and roll was not the first American music to bring black and white pop styles into close interaction. That's true too, because if you think about the Jazz Age and the 1920s and a lot of the really famous artists then, and even the big band era, how a lot of famous artists then are black and they are being crossed over into mainstream popular white styles. So it's not the first time that happened either. It's just on a larger scale, and it's being complained about more loudly. Rock and roll was not was a designation that introduced a commercial marketing team. All right, well, that's not really important. I'll leave that in my notes, but I'm not going to go over that right now. So the rise of R&B, rhythm and blues, and the teenage market. So R&B has a relatively young target audience to begin with, and the audience that shared some specific characteristics of a group cultural identity. So all of the young people at this time, the people who are teenagers in the 1950s, they all have this shared cultural experience in common. They're even though they were young, they're recovering from the trauma of World War II and a return to normalcy, or what was told to us to be normalcy. So there's a reverberation that's going on, and young people at that time still are feeling that as well. Growing up in relative economic stability and prosperity in the 1950s, but we're also under the threat of Cold War with Russia all the time, and that's a very big part of our culture too. It's something I left off my notes from before. So the Cold War that we're having with Russia that we had was going on. It started in the mid 1950s. It really amped up by the late 1950s, early 1960s, and we'd have nuclear attack drills where we'd hear a siren and have to duck and cover under our desks. And even in third grade, I realized that wasn't going to help me a lot. But while we're living in this economic prosperity and everybody's having a fun, good time, we also have the specter of nuclear war hanging over us. And anytime a leader from Russia or the United States sneezes wrong, are we going to all get blown up by nuclear war? It's very space-oriented too, and there are movies out at the time that talk about how the nuclear arms race is out of control and how the humankind needs to be brought back into compliance, or at least, not threaten the rest of the universe. And one of those movies at this time is The Day the Earth Stood Still. So if you ever get a chance to see that, you should. It's a really great sci-fi movie, and it talks about, it's very good representation of late 1950s culture. These are the first generation of people also to grow up with television and have an even bigger shared cultural experience than their parents had. And again, the Cold War, like I talked about, levels of racial tension in America are really is spiking right now because the Supreme Court in the mid-1950s had Brown versus the Board of Education desegregating public schools. So again, there's a cultural war going on between generations, between segregationists and non-segregationists, workers' rights, all sorts of things are bubbling up. it looks good on the surface, but there's more going on than what people like to remember through nostalgia. The emergence of rock and roll as a genre and market, is definitely directed at teenagers who had a disposable income, and this was a relatively new thing. The fact that teenagers weren't having to give money to their parents to help support the household from their part-time after-school job, or the fact that they could finish school at all uninterrupted by economic hardship that they had to help their families through. It's a big deal. This generation is experiencing that for the first time. And this is also lending to the whole idea of this being a spoiled, rotten generation. Not only don't they have to help support their families when they're old enough, they get something called an allowance, where they're just out of control. So now you've got this group of young people who have money to spend, and this is a consumer capitalistic society. When there's a group identified that you get to sell to, a whole new market's developed, right? Vocal styles during this time, the music, it's a little more raw, it's a little more harsh, and it seems threatening to some adults. And lyrics seemed suggested, like sexually suggestive or even explicit. And so these are other complaints that people who didn't like rock and roll are saying. Instruments were played loudly, and that was another obnoxious thing that adults thought at the time, especially the electric guitar and the drums. And they have electric amplifiers to make those instruments even louder. And again, that's a youth statement. That's like, we're going to be loud and proud, and if you don't like it, too bad. And adults saying, look at them being defiant and being loud and proud, and they don't care that we don't like it. So, generation gap. Drum beats produced rhythmic, emphatic dance rhythms, and so it seemed very tribal and primitive to the older generation. And the prevailing emotion was excitement. Everybody was excited and hopeful, and the world just seemed to be wide open and anything could happen. Jukebox operators, record store owners, and disc jockeys noticed a demand for R&B among white teenagers in the early 1950s, and that's when they started playing it. We talked about that. And then I just talked about Alan Freed. Well, there's a whole thing in my notes that I'm going to post for you guys about Alan Freed, and how he was dubbed the Pied Piper of rock and roll, and how he was persecuted for it, and not so much because of his ethics, or it was the style of music that the establishment did not like, and the mixing of the races that was being fought during this time, and that's why he was persecuted. Okay, let's see here in my notes where I want to stop for now. Although I know I want to play one thing for you, so I want to get down here and do that. Our tenant's dog next door is like howling for some strange reason. Annabelle is unhappy. Okay, well, this is about covering. So remember last week I talked about the practice of covering that happened in the early 1950s, and it happened during the 40s too, that a black artist would come out with a song that they wrote and perform themselves, and it would start to take off and become somewhat popular to white listeners, and then the record companies would get the rights to that song and have it covered by a white performer. Well, that was happening during this time too. And, while it marginalized the African American performers, it also gave the song a second life and got it out there where it may not have been heard before. So this is Shake, Rattle, and Roll And it's by Big Joe Turner, and this is from February of 1954. So Big Joe Turner is an African American performer. Shake, Rattle, and Roll is like an anthem rock and roll song from the early 1950s. I will so find my cursor. It's right there. When you hear it, you'll recognize it, or maybe not. I don't know if Mercury is retrograde today, but my technology is acting kind of goofy. So bear with me for a minute while I copy this and get it into YouTube for you guys to listen to. So this is pre-rock and roll. This is what rock and roll sounded like before they started calling it rock and roll. And then when the record companies discovered that this song started to take off and become a hit, they had a white entertainer cover it. And, you know, granted it was Bill Haley, and he is was an amazing piano player and performer, but it's just the idea that sort of, you know, the song was stolen from them. Not stolen, it got paid for, but it got paid for very little. Not what it was worth, and then usurped, taken over, and whited up.
Carcovers.com sent us this car cover to review. This is their ultra platinum, their top of the line car cover. And besides the car cover, they also sent.
Anyway, I can tell YouTube I don't have a car.
Get out of that bed, wash your face and hands.
So that's Big Joe Turner, the original version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll. And if you notice about early rock and roll right now, the electric guitar isn't really even a part of this whole thing. It's a saxophone, there's a piano, it's got a boogie-woogie kind of a beat going on with the piano. There's drums and a stand-up bass guitar. So that's pretty much what the ensemble is. Now, this is the cover version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll with Bill Haley and the Comets. Let's see if this is the live version that I wanted to show you guys. Maybe. Shake, Rattle, and Roll, stereo mix. Alright, we'll listen to this. But this is Bill Haley and his Comets with a remake of this song, a cover of it. Done in the same year that the Big Joe Turner song came out.
Get out in that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans. Get out in that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans. Well, roll my breakfast, 'cause I'm a said, shake, rattle and roll. I said, shake, rattle and roll. I said, shake, rattle and roll. I said, shake, rattle and roll. Well, you never do nothing to save your doggone soul. Go! Go! Go!
So it's lively, it's upbeat, it's full of excitement. It's also full of white people. There's not a black person in the scene there. But they're all usurping African American culture, their dance moves, their music styles. There's Bill Haley and the Comets playing the song in the background there. And this is an interesting sort of video. I don't know if you can see it or not. I think I have something like this posted on Moodle. I have a Bill Haley thing where you can see the dress style of the time. Remember I said that things were a little more streamlined and modernized, so the dresses, like the skirts, are not big and poofy and swingy, and instead they're more pencil skirts, and it's a more casual look too. Guys are wearing these button-down plaid shirts, and no, where's the suit and tie? Even the jitterbug dancers wore their zoot suits. So the aesthetic is changing. It's more youthful, it's more vibrant, it's more upbeat. Definitely can tell that you're looking at a room full of teenagers by looking at this video. If you looked at a dance scene from the early 1950s, you wouldn't be so sure how old those people were. They were still dressing like adults, like they're grown-ups. Starting to develop their own style with the bobby socks and things, but that's even more later on. During the 1940s, young people are dressing like their parents. So now what you see in this video is a definite shift towards youthful aesthetic, youthful vibe, what's popular with young people, right? All right, want to just take a quick look at maybe one or two other things before we end for today. But again, early rock and roll, the electric guitar, the guitar at all, it's not really coming into play. It's not important yet, but it's going to become important, so pay attention. All right, this is a song called Shaboom, and it's a variation of doo-wop. So remember I said doo-wop was the vocal harmony, a cappella vocal harmony that a lot of young people used to do together just for fun. They would do it in bathrooms at schools and high schools, and stairways in high schools, and underneath bridges. Any place that had really fun echoey acoustics is where they would do this. It caught on, and it caught on with record companies, and soon became part of the mainstream pop music sound that was going on. And I want to just take a quick listen to them, and then when we come back on Thursday, we will continue talking about folks like Elvis Presley and Buddy Holly and some of the other performers from that day, like Fats Domino and Little Richard, maybe even a little more Chuck Berry. We'll see. It's unfortunate with a class like this, I can't turn you on to every single important artist from an era. I wish I could, but we try to get the most important ones in. And again, I posted those links on Moodle for a reason. I want you to listen to the sound of that day.
Is your back aching from all that scraping?
No, my head hurts.
Not mine.
though.
I've got Platinum Shield protection.
Life could be a dream, life could be a dream. Shaboom. Life could be a dream. If I could take you up in paradise up above. If you would tell me I'm the only one that you love, life would be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, and open with me to boom. Ding dong, ding dong, a lang, a lang, a lang. Oh, 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 dip, a dip, a dip, oh, life would be a dream. If only all my precious plans would come true. If you would let me spend my whole life loving you, life would be a dream, sweetheart.
Every time I look at you, something is all right. If you do what I want you to, baby, make me so high.
Oh, life could be a dream. Shaboom, if I could take you up in paradise up above. Shaboom, tell me, darling, I'm the only one that you love. Life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, and home, a bitty, a boom, a boom. Life could be a dream. Life could be a dream, sweetheart.
So, okay, that was the Chords, an early vocal group from the mid-1950s, and the Platters and the Temptations and the Box Tops and the Four Seasons and all sorts of other groups that followed after them took off from this kind of a style here. It's a combination of rhythm and blues sound, right? A blues sound to it with the rhythm. It's a vocal harmony. It's got its roots in some Tin Pan Alley ballady kind of formations in its structure. And you also have a little bit of scat singing going on with the doo-wop, doo-wop, shaboobity-boobity-boobity-boobity-boom stuff, right? That's a lot like jazz scat singing that was going on in the late 1940s. So a lot of different things come together in this stone soup of a musical composition that features vocals in the forefront. Whatever musical instruments are going on are in the way background. The really important feature to this song are the harmony, is the harmony that's going on with these four singers. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you today about this style of music. We are going to get a little more deep into it Thursday when we get back together again. Meanwhile, you would be smart. In fact, it's really important for you to get your forum work done if you missed it last week. Get it done. Get your think response in. Easy grades, and you need them because getting zeros in them is going to bring your grade down a lot. So don't do that to yourself. It's just wrong. And to also listen to the track that I have here of Bill Haley and the Comets on Moodle. This other Billboard top rock hits one that I have, 1955 to 1959. It's less than 10 minutes long and it's a lot of fun. It's really going to give you a good experience, a well-rounded perspective of the different styles of music at that time and what was popular. And the forum is also there, but before you do the forum, you should really listen to those other things, those other links that I have there, and also watch this video about the day the music died with Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper and Richie Valens and others who died in that plane crash that day and the effect that it had on youth culture and rock and roll. So, anybody have any questions for me before we end for today? If you do, you can email me. Get caught up, get started if you are caught up on this next batch of work. It's not that hard this week, and we're just going to keep plugging forward because we've got this. We can do this. And in the end of a few weeks, you're going to be proud of yourselves that you at least accomplished something while the whole world was standing still. Talk about the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. Kind of feels like that for us right now, right? The Earth has just sort of stood still. If you got a few minutes, you should check out that movie on Netflix, The Day the Earth Stood Still. It's a lot of fun. And it'll give you a good idea about the 1950s, too. All right, everybody, I will see you again on Thursday, and I'll talk to you if you need to talk to me.